Basim, his name, it means the cheerful one, the smiling one. I love that. We see pink flamingos in a pond in the palace gardens. And yes, there really were flamingos in Abbasid Baghdad. Poor Basim, look at him, fully dressed, boot, belts, layers. He's basically dressed for a battle, standing in a room designed to make you sweat as much as possible. Welcome to Echoes of History. I am Dr. Nassima Neggaz, Associate Professor of History and Religion at New College of Florida. Join me on a tour of Baghdad in the 9th century as it is recreated in the video game Assassin's Creed Mirage. We will look around the medieval world's largest library and its observatory. We will visit the heart of worship in the city's great mosque, walk through the grounds of a royal palace, then refresh with a trip to the steam baths before riding the canals to the lush sights and smells of the markets, before visiting the iconic Qubbat al-Himar. If you enjoy this video and want to see more like it, don't forget to like and subscribe to Echoes of History and share with all your friends. Our protagonist, our MC, Basim ibn Ishaq, is standing in front of the Bayt al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom in Baghdad in year 861. We see a buzzing city that's only about 100 years old at the time. And it's Caliph al-Mansur who founded Baghdad as the new capital of the Abbasid Caliphate in 762. That was an empire stretching from North Africa to the Indus Valley. Now, in the 9th century, Baghdad is in the middle of an extraordinary scientific and intellectual boom. If you had skills and you wanted to make a living, especially as a translator or scientist, Baghdad was the place to be. And Baghdad attracted many scholars and merchants and artists from across the world. It was possibly the most cosmopolitan city of the medieval world and definitely a major hub on the Silk Road. Now, walking through Baghdad streets, you would meet Arabs, Persians, Turks, Central Asians, Greeks, Africans, Chinese, Indians, I mean, you name it. And many religious groups, Muslims, Christians, Jews, Zoroastrians, Sabians, and even Buddhists and Hindus. The game does a great job at capturing this diversity. Now, the empire is at its height. It's a period known as the Golden Age, but historians don't like this label because it's unclear when the Golden Age ends. I mean, intellectual life continues long after the Mongol invasions in the 13th century. Now, quick detail, at the time of the game, the capital had moved to Samarra, 80 miles north of Baghdad. This is the Bayt al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom. So this is where some of the world's most advanced knowledge was produced, all thanks to the patronage of the Abbasid caliphs. And Ubisoft gives us a spectacular, monumental building, but this image is a bit misleading. Historically, we don't have evidence for one grand structure. It was more likely a set of scholarly spaces spread across Baghdad. Bayt al-Hikmah began actually as a palace library under Caliph Harun al-Rashid, housing his book collection, and later it expanded into a center for translations and scientific debate and teaching. So architecturally, Bayt al-Hikmah in the game blends together styles from different Islamic periods and regions, especially Iran. What you're seeing feels like a mix of Seljuk and Safavid architecture. The monumental iwans, the blue and white glazed ceramics, the dense blue tilework, the large blue dome. 9th century Abbasid architecture relied primarily on brick, stucco, plaster, and paint. So no glazed tile, no blue domes. What we do see in Abbasid context are beautifully engraved brick patterns and carved stucco ornamentations. You will also notice Andalusian features here, like the Orsu arch, which is a hallmark of the Ubaid Caliphate of Cordoba. Oh, we see a female scholar debating in the House of Wisdom, and yes, women were scholars, they were poets and jurists. I'm reminded of Sutaita al-Mahamili, the 10th century mathematician and legal scholar. This woman was renowned for her ability to solve complex equations. She even developed mathematical methods used for inheritance calculations. It was common for the wives and mothers of caliphs to own books and libraries. I like to tell my students that the first university in the world was founded by a woman, Fatima al-Fihriya, in 859 in Fez, Morocco. What a gorgeous armillary sphere. Astronomical instruments were common in Baghdad, especially the astrolabe, which was flat, portable, highly practical. And it was used to calculate time, direction, navigation. And think of this armillary sphere as a 3D teaching model of the cosmos. I mean, you see the rings showing the paths of stars and planets. The Andalusian tile decor is so gorgeous, but anachronistic for Baghdad. It's closer to Al-Hamra, but the space feels inviting, perfect for long hours of study. A lot of furniture looks closer to Ottoman Syria, especially the chairs and tables. Notice the carpets. Luxury carpets were made with silk from the East, but also wool and cotton from Egypt. And cheaper rugs were made of goat or camel hair, so extremely durable materials. Camels are highly important in Arab culture because they can survive in very arid environments. So what did people do in the House of Wisdom? They collected books from all over the world, especially books by Greek philosophers. They translated them into Arabic. They corrected, improved this knowledge through scientific experience, they taught, and they held scholarly debates. Imagine they did this for all fields of knowledge. I mean, from astronomy to mathematics to philosophy or medicine. So who would you find in this space? Scholars, translators, scribes, astronomers, students, teachers, men and women from all backgrounds, like the Persian al-Khwarizmi, the father of algebra, or the Syriac Christian Hunayn ibn Ishaq. And what united all these people was not ethnicity, not religion, but science, with Arabic as a shared lingua franca. Oh, and it is said that Caliph al-Ma'mun paid Hunayn the weight in gold of every book that he translated. He felt that wisdom was quite literally worth its weight in gold. So you would have different rooms for different purposes in Bayt al-Hikmah. So majlis salons for scholarly gatherings, sometimes headed by the caliph himself. Copying rooms, like here, you would see paper and ink. The open shelves that you see all around, they're great. Historically, precious manuscripts were stored in chests and wrapped. And the silence is definitely misleading. The House of Wisdom felt more like an office than a library because translation was oral with dictation, debate, and correction. Oh, this courtyard is typical of Abbasid palaces and residences. Or like, think of the later colleges like the famous Mustansiriya Madrasa. The courtyards had gardens filled with greenery and fountains. The Abbasids were all about mind-body balance and well-being. You could see it in the way the space was designed, especially the Islamic hospital, the Bimaristan, where the gardens and the sound of water were soothing for patients. And since they treated patients first with food and herbs, the hospital gardens often grew their own medicinal plants. How cool is that? And the coolest thing, hospitals were free and open to all. Now, the scale of the building really shows the importance of knowledge in this time. There's a well-known hadith where Prophet Muhammad ﷺ states that for every disease, God also created a cure, except for old age and death. So Muslims are really encouraged to seek knowledge to improve their lives and societies. And this is what the Abbasid caliphs did when they invested in knowledge production. So I love the wooden work here, the tiles and the carved stucco decorations. Abbasid interiors were usually built in mud brick and then covered with plaster, and that gave artists a lot of freedom to carve the walls with different kinds of stucco decoration, often geometric patterns and symmetrical designs. Simple, elegant, and very Abbasid. Now, historically, the Bayt al-Hikmah was part of a much larger book ecosystem of court libraries and private collections and mosques and hospitals and book markets. So historians suggest hundreds of thousands of volumes circulating in Baghdad by the 9th and 10th centuries. That surpasses Alexandria and later Cordoba in sheer volume. I love this aerial view. I mean, the weather is very palpable here. The developers did an amazing job with the atmosphere between night and day and the light to show different times of day. Now, it was very hot in Baghdad, so people wore cotton a lot. And the design of brick homes, with their internal courtyards, that also helped to ventilate easily. Oh, the guard is telling Basim to go away and not be so close. It's interesting, the game uses classical Arabic when, in fact, Arabic speakers use dialects when they're speaking. Now, Basim is up the stairs to an observatory point. When a scholar worked with manuscripts in the Bayt al-Hikmah, he also conducted experiments outside. So just like this astronomer is doing, the drawings and calculations on the large paper sheets are very realistic. Another fountain, water was provided by the state, clean and ready to use, and free as per Islamic law. Think about the infrastructure needed to supply a city of possibly 1 million people. I'm sure you noticed the dense streets in the game and the height of the buildings in the game. That's mostly right. You see 2- and 3-story buildings with flat roofs and not many high homes looking into the neighbor's courtyard. And roofs were used for sleeping and sitting and even storage. So I can see and hear birds, maybe you do. That's definitely accurate. Baghdad was located between 2 major rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates, and near vast marshlands that were home to millions of birds. So like flamingos, pelicans, and birds of prey like falcons and eagles. The dome garden pavilion here, this is called a qubba for relaxation. It has 4 wide open arches, so you're both inside and outside and shaded. How amazing is that? I just want to be there. Another blue dome. This is anachronistic again in Abbasid Baghdad. So historically, domes were common in Abbasid architecture, but the strong blue glazing we see here reflects later Islamic aesthetics. And Ubisoft gave them colors to act like visual markers for the players, so the players know where they are in the city. I'm hearing Persian. Throughout the game, we also hear at least 6 different languages. And walking down the streets of Baghdad, you would hear Arabic, Persian, Turkic languages, Greek, Syriac, Hebrew, Chinese, and others. And Arabic was the most common language, and what's cool is that most people were multilingual, and Arabic connected everyone. Now, clothing is probably the clearest way the game represents this diversity. So we know elite Muslim men wore layered garments and Persian kaftans with fine fabrics, flowing cuts, restrained colors. The kaftan is a robe with sleeves that button down the front. And black garments signaled Abbasid loyalty and court affiliation. Elite women wore luxurious silks, embroidered sandals, elaborate perfumes, and accessories. And scholars wore more conservative, clean attire. Soldiers had uniforms. Rank was actually shown through belts and weapons and boots. And laborers wore shorter, more practical garments made of wool or coarse textile with fewer layers. And you had to mix all the foreign dresses that the people brought with them. And that made a really colorful city. Baghdad was a fashion capital, truly. Abbasid caliphs and elite women were major trendsetters. For example, Caliph al-Mu'tasim, he imitated Persian kings by wearing a turban over a soft cap, and people quickly copied him, even naming the style Mu'tasimi. Another example is Zubaydah, the wife of Caliph Harun al-Rashid. She introduced sandals embroidered with gemstones that soon became very fashionable. Okay, this is a typical Abbasid era bridge over one of the many canals in Baghdad. And if you think of the layout of Abbasid Baghdad, it was built as a round city following Sasanian models with 4 main gates, and it slowly engulfed the main neighborhoods around it. So it really functioned as an agglomeration. The location was chosen by Al-Mansur because it was strategic between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. And of course, it's the heart of civilization. It was also the site of ancient cities like Babylon. And if you think of it, the ruins of ancient Babylon are located in modern-day Iraq, approximately 50 miles south of Baghdad. We see the observatory here. You have a beautiful view of, this is the Shamasiya Observatory up the stairs. And it was a real historical place. And like in the game, it was located next to the House of Wisdom. And the Shamasiya Observatory was the first major observatory in Baghdad and in the Islamic world. It was founded by Caliph al-Ma'mun, who was very literate and fond of knowledge. He actually founded 2 observatories, the Shamasiya in 828 and the Qasyun Observatory in Damascus. You could say this was the beginning of state-sponsored big science. And astronomy really flourished under the Abbasids. These observatories, they measured the Earth's circumference, they refined the length of the solar year, they developed spherical trigonometry, they corrected the work of Ptolemy and came up with even more accurate models. All of this knowledge would be foundational to the later European Renaissance. Very cool scene. You have a rooftop terrace organized for astronomy calculations. I love that there is a woman, a scientist there. It reminds me of the celebrated 10th century astronomer Maryam el-Ajliya el-Asturlabi. Take note of her last name, Asturlabi. And in the back, behind those curtains, it's a working area. The curtains are there to soften the light and heat. We see a mural quadrant. Baghdadi scientists use these large instruments to make precise observations to create more accurate zij, the astro tables. This large armillary sphere you see here is actually accurate. Armillary spheres had existed since antiquity, even as early as 4th century China. But Abbasid astronomers developed far more advanced models for studying the movement of stars and planets. I mean, you just really see how deeply the Abbasids cared about astronomy. It allowed them to travel far and wide, to calculate prayer times and calendars, or the direction of Mecca. But it also mattered politically because calendars regulated taxation and administration. And even astrology sometimes guided court decisions. I'll give you one example. When Caliph al-Mansur founded Baghdad, he sought astrologers' help to choose the most auspicious moment to begin the construction of the Round City. In a way, you could say political power was imagined as aligned with the order of the cosmos. We sometimes hear storytelling on the streets. That's so cool because, yes, you had storytellers called qassasin who captivated the crowds with their tales, much like the tales of the 1001 Nights. I mean, storytelling was a respected profession in Baghdad, and even today, the Hakawati tradition still continues in the Middle East. To our left, notice the wooden structure jutting out of the building's facade. That's called a shanashil, or a mashrabiya-style balcony. It's Abbasid and is still a feature of traditional houses in Baghdad and many cities across the Middle East. So typically the shanashil dominates the upper floor, and it's made of finely carved wood, often teak. It has lattice windows that you can open and close to control sunlight and airflow and privacy. I love the shanashil because it creates a cooler, more comfortable living space in the heat. And it's decorative and functional. That's just brilliant. Oh, ahlan. This is a boy saying hello to Basim. So we're heading towards a different neighborhood, Harbiya. And it's a different atmosphere altogether. I think you can tell it's a more industrial district, and that's what Al-Harbiya was. Generally a more artisanal quarter. And as you can see, buildings needed frequent repair because of flooding and decay. And you'll notice this throughout the game. This is a metalware market stall with copper, large trays, basins, and even oil lamps. Now, Basim is going through a sabat. That's a covered street passage to create shade and cool the street, or even mark a neighborhood boundary. It was common in desert cities and very common in Abbasid urban design. So this looks like a garden courtyard attached to a residence. Notice how architecture and vegetation are intertwined. See the arch loggia at ground level that provides shade and air circulation with the, you had a roof terrace above covered with fabric. That, creates private outdoor rooms for rest, conversation, receiving guests. And here again, the fabric canopy stretching between walls and trees. That's a temporary shading device used to cool courtyards and passages. That was very common in Abbasid Baghdad. Let's talk about Basim's outfit. We should feel bad for Basim under this heat. I mean, he's wearing a heavy mix of leather and metal. That feels much closer to a medieval Western knight. Abbasid soldiers did not wear full-body leather armor like this. Instead, they used lamellar armor, chainmail, or padded garments, with rank shown through helmets, belts, and weapons. Now, the Abbasids didn't have knights in the European feudal sense. There was no land-based knighthood system. But they did have highly trained professional armies, including elite cavalry influenced by Persian traditions. And that martial art, culture, it was called furusiya. And it was based on horsemanship, on discipline and skill at arms. Notice the musician here sitting with his instrument. It looked like an oud. That's the ancestor of the Western lute or guitar. People loved the oud. It was a refined instrument at the Abbasid court, and music was central for Baghdad's social life. I mean, Baghdad was home to famous musicians and singers, men and women. They made excellent livings. For example, Zeryab was a famous musician and poet at the court of Harun al-Rashid. Here we are approaching the Jamia al-Mansour, the great mosque of al-Mansour. The first thing is that the location in the game is not historically correct. The great mosque of al-Mansour was located within the round city, adjacent to the palace of the Green Dome, not within the Harbiya district. It was first built in 763 under Caliph al-Mansur, then rebuilt in 807. We're unsure when it was destroyed. Apparently the mosque survived the Mongols. And the famous Moroccan explorer Ibn Battuta confirmed visiting the mosque in 1327 during his travels. So the mosque was a large brick structure in the middle of the city, and the Mirage did a pretty good job. So the mosque was built with mud brick and timber and later rebuilt with baked bricks and mortar. So you'll see baked brick domes, vaults, stone foundations and decorative stucco. And here we're getting to the central courtyard, the Sahan. And that was the focal point, you know. It was often paved with stones or planted with trees. And again, you see a lot of blue decorations. That comes later. Although you had some early Abbasid innovations of stucco designs that were sometimes colored red or blue. We're seeing men chatting, laughing, and drinking tea in the mosque. That's totally accurate. Mosques were social spaces, and yes, people drank tea. I mean, coffee comes later in the 15th century in Yemen through Sufi mystics who drank it to worship at night. And then it made its way to the rest of the world. So here I think that the game does a great job at showing how embedded the mosque was in the city. People pass through, they gather, they converse. It's a social hub. So really this is a classic Abbasid courtyard style. Oh, and notice the boys, they're reading the Quran, the holy book for Muslims. All right, Basim walks across the central pool of the courtyard here. The pool in a mosque courtyard is closely tied to ritual purity in Islam. So water is essential for wudu, the ablution performed before prayer. And the pool also creates a moment of pause and reflection. It's like a transition from the everyday world into ritual prayer. So most mosque courtyards contain a public pool. Even today's mosques have that. And Basim is on top of the mosque. You have a beautiful view here of the Sahan and of the mosque architecture. The decorative arches, they feel more Seljuk than Abbasid, but you really get the scale of this mosque. It was a large quadrangle, approximately 100 yards square, and it served as the primary congregational mosque for the new capital at the heart of the Ram city. And really the beautiful design of this mosque, the role of this mosque, all of that influenced later Islamic architecture. Basim is back on the streets. You know, Baghdad was such a magnet, and it had many travelers, and hosting travelers was common among local Baghdadis. I mean, Baghdadis were curious about the world and hospitable and generous towards guests. So we have accounts of travelers who stayed in Baghdad without spending a single dirham. Well, the tower you see is the mosque's minaret, from which you would hear the call to prayer 5 times a day. And that's a textile or fabric stall shaded by a canopy. And here it looks like they are selling pottery. We see jars and storage vessels. So going bareheaded in public was uncommon. It was bright and it was hot. This passageway with the brick pointed arch is very Abbasid. I love these fountain niches. They're made of beautiful tiles. They cool the air through evaporation. They offer sound and visual comfort. You notice the wooden scaffolding, the ladders, the stacked materials. Yes, brick and mud brick structures required regular maintenance. Now you see here a carpenter working timber directly onto a bench in the street, and layers of fabric awning stretched overhead to protect people from heat and protect the goods as well. You have a lot of unfinished brick surfaces. Notice uneven dusty grounds, and again, it's very accurate because paving was selective. Notice the water on the ground. That's a great detail because the streets were often wet, muddy, or partially flooded in Baghdad because of the open canals. And water pools where ground levels dipped. And this is why people wore sandals and soft, dark shoes. Now, the wooden stands and frames are all temporary market infrastructure, kind of like your modern farmer's market. You dismantle everything quickly. And you're looking now at the Damascus gate of the round city. It looks monumental here. That's great because sources tell us these round city gates were massive and intimidating. We know there were very tall gates on the ramparts. There is a famous story that a horseman carrying a banner should be able to enter without dismounting or lowering the banner. And these gates were used for inspection and security. There are 4 of them total. We'll see more of them later. The red banners that you see to the right, they're interesting. They look Mamluk. The Abbasids are famous for using black banners. And of course, beyond the huge gate doors, we get a glimpse of the Green Dome Palace. Now, this palace adjacent avenue is wide with regular paving and arcaded buildings rising on either side. Wow, such a change from Harbiya. The wooden crane behind Basim is anachronistic. You will see a similar crane along the canal. On Basim's path here, we see a stage where a man is addressing passersby. This person could be an official or a market supervisor or possibly another orator. And these platforms were common. This wide paved street screams elite architecture. I mean, you have recessed balconies, you have stuccoed facades, columned portico, vaulted bays, and of course the guards are very present. On your left, a large water basin. People are having a good time cooling off in a hot day in Baghdad. See the horse rider? Horses were used by the military and male aristocrats, but also anyone who could afford them, including women. So elite women with the right amount of gold dinars and silver dirhams could own and ride both camels and horses. Notice the fire basins operated by the guards. They were used to burn incense and aromatics. They provided warmth or light at a gate. We'll talk more about Abbasid fragrance later. Oh wow, you've got to love the raised planted bed behind the fountain with flowering shrubs. That's very common in Islamic architecture. It reminds me of El Hamra in Granada, really a place to see. Oh, and that camel crossing. And behind us, the gate of Qasr al-Dhahab, the Palace of the Green Dome, also known as the Palace of the Golden Gate. So this royal palace was built in 763, right at the heart of the round city. It had a spectacular green dome that was 120 feet high, visible to the entire city. A real symbol of royal power. The palace complex spanned about 200 square yards, so you'll see a lot of people taking care of that space. In the game, the palace architecture feels very Iranian, more like Ilkhanid or Safavid Iran. Oh, we see a cat wandering around the palace. Cats were common in Abbasid Baghdad. They were everywhere. Homes, palaces, and mosques. I mean, cats enjoy a positive status in Muslim societies. They are considered ritually clean. One of the most popular stories about cats is Prophet Muhammad ﷺ cutting his own garment after his cat Mu'izza had fallen asleep on it. And rather than disturb the cat, he cut the sleeve of his robe so he could leave. Oh, notice the butterflies all around. They were common in Mesopotamia, especially in spring and early summer because of the gardens and the flowers. And they're mentioned in Abbasid poetry. They're referred to as farrash. There was a ton of routine palace labor. Imagine all the work just to keep this place green. And green meant so much to the people here. Green meant paradise. It was the prophet's color. We really see a garden full of life, nature, harmony. We see pink flamingos in a pond in the palace gardens. And yes, there really were flamingos in Abbasid Baghdad. Flamingos were actually native to the wetlands of Mesopotamia, especially the marshlands of southern Iraq. So flamingos were not exotic imports, they were locally known birds. Their presence inside palace gardens is not directly attested in the sources, but it fits with what we know of Abbasid menageries. I could totally see the caliphs enjoying their presence. And here we're passing through a tiled archway with blue glazed decoration. It looks great in the game. The devs did a wonderful job. And the purple flowers, they look beautiful. They resemble bougainvillea, which is a modern plant from South America. Abbasid Baghdad truly loved flowers and fragrances. I mean, so much so that rose water was a staple in Baghdadi homes. This water channel running alongside the walkway is classic Islamic garden design, all about cool air and sound. And look at this cute pavilion. Wouldn't it be fantastic to sit in there with tea? We see water everywhere in these palace gardens, and in Persian garden design, water is absolutely central, practical and symbolic. It represents life, purity, abundance, even paradise itself. But it also does real work, irrigating plants, cooling the air, creating sound, movement, and reflection that bring calm to the mind. And water channels were fed by a system including Canals, and it was common to divide the garden into 4 parts, echoing the 4 rivers of Eden. It looks like the guards are taking notice of Basim. Watch out, Basim. This is a working terrace. You've got crates for supplies, sacks of grain, clay jars for water and oil, and ropes for lifting and tying things down. It's well guarded, and it has weapons and of course storehouses for food. So to me, this place suggests preparedness for siege or unrest. It's basically the backstage of palace life. That's probably why the guards are keeping a close eye on Basim. And this scaffolding, again, it shows you construction and repair. The palace was actually damaged in the civil war between the two brothers, Al-Amin and Al-Ma'mun. It's a very clean, well-maintained space with many workers. There's sweeping courtyards and polishing gates, attending to the gardens. And it's also heavily guarded, as you can see. There are guards rotating day and night. So Abbasid chronicles speak of the scale of works to build this palace, and it was enormous. They mention 100,000 workers and craftsmen and very large sums of gold dinars and silver dirhams. It took over a year to complete the palace and great mosque that we saw earlier. And I think even if the figures are stylized, we understand that this took an enormous mobilization at the time. We're now entering the palace for the first time, and we're in at last. We see a monumental audience hall, absolutely gorgeous. Notice the high ceilings, the flower petals on the carpets for fragrance. Everything screams sophistication. The colors, the fabrics, the warm stone, the hanging lamps, the restrained ornament. All of this fits with early Abbasid imperial taste, especially under Al-Mansur. But the space is too informal. It screams 1001 Nights and a bit of Orientalism, when historically this palace would have been more formal and more ceremonial. This is where the caliph received foreign officials and discussed state affairs. So the sources we have, like Al-Yaqubi or Al-Tabari, do not mention beds, cushions and music and carpets wall to wall, or all these servants and musicians and guards and attendants. It was not a space for domestic life like we see here. Here we can see a multi-story interior courtyard. The original caliphal palace was meant to be austere and intimidating, with a vast audience hall under the green dome. What we see here looks much closer to later Abbasid residential palaces along the Tigris. So comfortable, inhabited spaces designed for daily court life rather than imperial ceremony. The geometrical patterns for decoration are great, and the fact that there is no figurative imagery is spot on. Again, you notice the red banners on the walls, especially to your left. Black was the Abbasid dynastic colors, so black banners are expected inside the palace to signal caliphal authority and legitimacy. It's a very warm atmosphere with those fabrics. Oh, the candles, that's a fire hazard. Interior lighting came from oil lamps, beeswax candles, and sometimes crystal or glass lamps. You would see lamps hanging from chains, set into wall niches or carried around. And of course, natural light was key. And we're back now in the grand hall. Notice the chair or throne the caliph would sit on. The blue ornament is for the game, clearly. I have to say, Abbasid court protocol drew on Persian and Byzantine traditions, and sitting was a privilege tied to rank and status. So most officials and courtiers would be standing. Now, because nothing survives archaeologically from the round city's core, the palace is reconstructed from texts, so geography manuals and chronicles. There was a wide open space around the palace and the adjacent Great Mosque. Nothing was allowed to be built around them, only 2-3 administrative or military structures. If you think of the name Palace of the Golden Gate, it is said that the main ceremonial gate was plated with gold. And a common saying is, no one passed the Golden Gate except by permission of the Caliph. This is a great view, and the green dome is visible. It was often called the crown of Baghdad, the only colored dome of Baghdad, actually. And according to medieval chroniclers, on a night in March 941, a severe storm with heavy rain and thunder struck Baghdad, and the great dome of the palace partially collapsed. Was it lightning or heavy rain? We don't know, but chroniclers saw it as a symbolic destruction. It reflected the shifting fortunes of the Abbasids. I mean, the iconic crown of the palace was gone. The original dome was topped by a weather vane in the shape of a horseman, which, according to local legend, turned in the direction of the caliph's enemies. And according to AC Mirage, the weather vane was not added so Basim could sit atop the dome's peak. We have left the palace. We're back on the streets. This is a busy area with more merchants selling goods. Yeah, you see stacked goods, pottery. On the right, in front of us, we see flowering vines and potted plants. They soften the architecture of the gates, and that's common. On the left, the stacked bricks and raw materials are also very real. On the left, you've got a butcher's or meat seller's stall. Fresh meat was sold early in the day, uncovered and meant to be bought quickly. Notice the awnings overhead for shade. The next stand in the back has folded textiles and pillows laid out on rugs, displayed for people to touch. And fabric was one of Baghdad's biggest trades. I mean, Baghdad was a Silk Road hub. I liked how the hanging carpet works like a sign. This is where you buy textiles. We see fruit and vegetables, carrots, lemons, and maybe oranges. That's very likely. Baghdadis enjoyed a rich variety of fruits and vegetables thanks to the extensive trade networks. And the staple grains were rice, barley, and lentils. We are exiting the round city through Bab al-Kufa, the Kufa gate, southwest. So this is different from where we entered. Of course, the layout changes as you get away from the round city. If you think of it, the round city was a top-down design, very geometric, but the streets beyond it were more organic and less regular, which is exactly what you see here. That's the hammam with another blue dome. That's anachronistic, but as soon as you exit the round city, you start to hit the canals, especially in the south, here southwest of the round city. We will soon get a tour of the canals. The boat you see here is called a mashhouf. It's a traditional Mesopotamian canoe. It has been used in Mesopotamia for centuries, and it goes all the way back to the Sumerians. And guess what? It's still used today. We're arriving at the bathhouse, the hammam. Oh, the gate looks gorgeous. That's very accurate because Abbasid hammams reflected the wealth and the urban sophistication of the Caliphate. So in Ace and Mirage, the hammam appears as a single location on the map, but in real 9th century Baghdad, you could barely walk a few streets without running into one. The Abbasid historian Hilal al-Sabi claims that there were around 60,000 bathhouses in the city at its height. 60,000. That sounds wild, but remember, Baghdad may have had over 1 million inhabitants. Most homes did not have running hot water except wealthy households that had private hammams. And hygiene was key. Remember that Islam emphasized cleanliness through water, and that's a huge contrast with other regions. I mean, up to the French Revolution, French nobility thought that bathing in hot water was dangerous because it opens the pores to diseases. So dry cleansing was preferred. So Baghdad was on a different level. You'll notice this hammam is all men, but Baghdad absolutely had hammams for women. Some bathhouses had separate sections or separate hours for women. Oh, and in the game, the men are wearing neat little loincloths. It's very accurate. Modesty and cultural norms meant that a thin towel was typically worn around the waist, especially in communal areas and resting places. And a good scraper was necessary to scrub away the dead skin. And poor Basim, look at him, fully dressed, boot, belts, layers. He's basically dressed for a battle, standing in a room designed to make you sweat as much as possible. Historically speaking, someone would have taken one look at him and said, "My friend, you are doing this wrong." I love the hammam scene. It's beautiful and real. You can sense how these hammams kept the city clean and healthy and socially connected. And all people used the hammam. You know, they exchanged gossip, arranged marriages in the hammam. And medieval moralists loved to warn that too much talking happens in the baths. And if you want the experience, you can go to a hammam today in the Middle East. Like Turkey has many. We are now walking along the canals where you see daily activities that would have taken place there, like washing clothes, cleaning those gorgeous Persian carpets. Here we go. Basim did not even ask. He just hopped on a mashhouf. Basim is doing what Baghdadis did all the time, which is hopping on a boat on one of Baghdad's canals. And the fish we see are a great detail. Fishermen absolutely used Baghdad's canals to fish and supply fresh fish to the markets. Baghdad's canals were part of a network stretching roughly 300 kilometers, reaching all the way to Samarra and irrigating farmland across the Tigris. So we don't know the exact number, but Abbasid Baghdad had dozens of major canals and hundreds of smaller branches, and the Tigris fed the system. Those wooden crates that are sinking into the canal, they might look odd, but they were weighted storage crates or transport containers used to keep goods cool or temporarily stored. But not everything stayed dry. Now, the wooden lifting crane over the canal is anachronistic. Now, think of the canals as Baghdad's arteries. They moved people, food, building materials, wood, textiles, basically anything heavy or bulky. And they brought water everywhere so Baghdad could stay green. Imagine the infrastructure required to maintain this enormous system. I mean, you're looking at one of the most sophisticated urban water systems of the medieval world. Abbasid Baghdad functioned because water was managed and maintained. The round boats we're seeing, these are ancient Mesopotamian kufar. I love these details in the game. These kufars, they served as ferries, as cargo haulers and fishing vessels on the Tigris and Euphrates rivers for millennia, actually. And on the canals too. So basically goods were transported by boat and unloaded on the canal. And you'll notice some of these kufars have fruit, and that's to keep the fruit fresh. So basically the canal is the fridge. The canals are really what made Baghdad a major trade hub. They were not easy to maintain, floods happened, but they brought so much to the city, I mean, quite literally. There's a lot happening around those canals. Here we see meat hanging out to dry. This is preservation in action when you had to do without fridges. You know, drying and curing meat in the open air keeps it from spoiling in the heat. So this reminds me actually of an anecdote. The scholar Razi was looking for the best air quality to build a hospital, and he used a piece of meat that he left in different spots and then examined how it had spoiled. Quite brilliant. So canals and rivers were a blessing for Baghdad, but also a constant headache. You know, floods could wipe out whole neighborhoods when the Tigris rose too high, and low water levels could choke canals and cut supply lines. So keeping everything flowing meant non-stop maintenance. And we know from recent research that this was a shared effort between state power, elite investment, and local communities. Great parking job, Basim. Well, that's until he lost patience with the pole. So we are arriving in the markets of Karkh, south of the Round City. And it's perfectly credible that Basim would get there by boat. This was the most densely populated area of Baghdad and the most diverse. I mean, Kar had people from literally everywhere around the world, all walking the same streets. You sometimes notice Christian nuns in the market, and that's highly likely. Remember, Baghdad was very religiously diverse. There were many churches and monasteries. And we know of several famous Christian figures living in 9th century Baghdad, like the Nestorian physician, Hunayn ibn Ishaq, who led translation efforts at the House of Wisdom, or the philosopher and theologian Yahya ibn Adi. You also had prominent Christian leaders like the Nestorian patriarch Timothy I. He was leading his community in Baghdad and would engage in theological debates with caliphs. So Baghdad was a vibrant city for Christian scholars too. And I have to say, although the outfits you see here feel a bit stereotypical or exaggerated, one thing the game actually gets right is how diverse Baghdad was. This was probably the most cosmopolitan city on earth. In a way, you know, Baghdad was an empire compressed into streets. So why are all the markets in Karkh? Because it's convenient for goods to arrive through the canals. But the markets were originally within the round city. And there's a story about a comment from the Byzantine emperor who was visiting Baghdad in the 760s. He told the caliph that the city was magnificent, but it was also crawling with foreign enemies, so foreign traders within the city walls. And after hearing this, the caliph ordered the markets pushed into Karkh, so outside the city walls. And all the markets were moved by 773. Now, this area was not called a bazaar. That's a Persian term, and also it did not have as many carpets as we're seeing. That's anachronistic. And historically, the markets of Karkh might not have been a single covered market of that size. Baghdad was the center of a thriving empire from present-day eastern Algeria all the way to Pakistan. So its markets boasted goods from all over the world. Porcelain from China, spices from India, or silk from Iran. And the food was as rich. Baghdadis loved stews, especially with mutton meat and spiced with ingredients like lentils and turnips, pomegranate juice, and many herbs like mint or parsley or basil. Food was important in the caliph's kitchen. We have medieval cookbooks actually, like Kitab al-Tabikh, that gives us recipes of the time. Like the famous sigbaj dish, that's a meat stew, usually lamb, cooked in vinegar and often sweetened with dates or honey. And that, creates that distinctive sweet and sour flavor that Abbasid cuisine really loved. And people with less means, they ate bread, lentils, chickpeas, beans, and vegetable stews. So less meat, they used onions, garlic, dates, leeks, especially for flavor. And I mentioned the hospitals, they treated patients with food and herbs first, so food was a component of medicine. It's not just the goods, but also merchants that came from all over the world. I mean, Constantinople, Spain, and Andalus, China. So you'll find a large variety of goods that you can bargain, and even books. We saw stacks of paper. That's very accurate. Paper takes off in Baghdad in the late 8th century. And by the 9th century, it's everywhere. And it changes everything. It changes the state because the caliphate runs on paperwork. I mean, things about tax documents or decrees or court records. And paper is cheap, so much cheaper than parchment. It's fast, it's practical, so it becomes the backbone of one of the most sophisticated bureaucracies of the medieval world. And it fueled knowledge, the knowledge economy, because books are more affordable and portable. That's why Karf developed an entire book district. It was called Souk al-Warraqin, the market of paper makers and copyists and booksellers. And it had 100 shops, selling paper and copying texts and debating ideas. We see ivory for sale here. Ivory was absolutely prized in Abbasid culture. It was a luxury material imported from East Africa and India. And ivory was used for luxury objects, so think carved boxes, inlaid furniture, writing tools, or even chess pieces. It definitely signaled refinement and global connections. The developers did a great job. I mean, walking through the markets, you would see stalls packed with woven baskets and shallow bowls holding dates and nuts and dried fruit and spices. On the table to our left, we see glass and ceramic vessels, probably with oil, perfumes, or medicinal liquids. Baghdad was actually famous for its glass production too. We see another Christian man wearing a cross, and there were large Christian communities in Baghdad, especially Nestorian Christians or Jacobite or Syriac Orthodox Christians. And Christians, like Jews, were considered Ahl al-Kitab, so people of the book, so they were protected communities under Islamic law. What you're seeing are blocks of hard soap, very likely olive oil-based soap, which was widely produced and traded in the Abbasid world. The Islamic world was actually centuries ahead of Europe in solid soap production, so soap was essential not just for homes but for hammams, for mosques and hospitals. And cities like Baghdad, Basra and Aleppo were famous for soap making. We see people having tea, this is an area to eat a meal, almost like a coffee shop, although coffee and coffee shops emerged centuries later. The first actual coffee shop opened in Istanbul around 1475, and then coffee shops exploded in Ottoman urban life in the 16th century. And they made their way a century later to Venice and London and Paris and Vienna. So we see Persian carpets here and Chinese porcelain for sale. By 861, Baghdad sits right at the crossroad of global trade. And so what we call the Silk Road isn't a single road, it's a web of routes that linked China and Central Asia, Iran, India, the Islamic world, and the Mediterranean. And that's why seeing Persian carpets and Chinese porcelain here makes perfect sense. Carpets came overland from Iran and Central Asia, and porcelain traveled from China through multiple intermediaries before reaching Abbasid markets. So Baghdad was consuming luxury goods and redistributing them. So Baghdad functioned as a global clearinghouse. Goods moved in by caravan and by river were traded, taxed, repackaged, and sent back out across the empire. We hear some haggling in Arabic. There was probably a lot of negotiating at the markets. And Baghdad used silver, dirhams, and gold dinars at the time. Paper money did not exist then. And you had an entire street in Karh for money changers. That shows you how truly global Baghdad was. And markets were also a regulated space. I mean, there was a market inspector called Muhtasib who checked the fairness of measuring scales and the quality of goods. So here, Basim is on a raised wooden platform, and that's a stage, very likely for announcements, but also entertainment possibly. Abbasid markets were loud and crowded. So such a platform would be used for official announcements or storytellers, poets and preachers. The game does a good job with sound and light as well. Abbasid Baghdad was loud, and not in the modern way simply. There were no engines or sirens, but a constant human soundtrack. So you would hear the call to prayer rolling across the city 5 times a day, echoing from mosque to mosque. And markets especially were noisy hives. I mean, vendors shouting prices and coppersmiths and, people arguing and laughing and bargaining, camels and donkeys and horses, chickens sometimes in courtyards. And then you add, storytellers and preachers and street musicians and construction work and everyday life spilling into the streets. So people are cooking and chatting and fixing things. I mean, Baghdad was never quiet. It was a living, breathing city. You get that sense from the game. The Karh markets, they gradually declined over the centuries, and they were completely destroyed by extreme flooding in 1831. So we have left the markets of Karh and we're heading towards the Dome of the Ass. We see a Nestorian monastery, and I know this might surprise people, but there were many in Baghdad, especially in Karh, and I've worked on this neighborhood quite a bit, or Rusafa in East Baghdad, and that's because many Christians lived close to caliphal and administrative zones, so close to scholarly institutions like the House of Wisdom, close to hospitals and translation circles. And the Christians who lived in Karh were often merchants or artisans or traders. Now, there wasn't one single area where Christians lived. They were everywhere in the city, of course. But we know of a few prominent monasteries in an area of Rusafa called Shamasiya. So, for example, Deir Durmalis or Deir Samalu or Deir Ar-Rum. We don't have an exact number of old churches and monasteries or synagogues, but we know they were well integrated in Baghdad's city life, and they often attracted Muslims during festivals. We are almost at the Dome of the Ass. Historical inaccuracy alert 1 in the game, it is southwest of the round city, but the real location was on the eastern bank of Baghdad, a little north of the palace of the caliph and right on the Tigris to be used as a lookout. But in the game, only western Baghdad is reconstructed, so even the bridges between the two banks are not there. Historical inaccuracy alert 2. AC Mirage is set in 861, but the Dome of the Ass was constructed as part of the palace of Caliph al-Muqtafi between 902 and 908. But how do you not include such an iconic building with a great view of the city? So the Dome of the Ass, Qubbat al-Himar in Arabic, gets its name from its hilarious purpose. Caliph al-Muqtafi wanted to get a beautiful view of the city without having to climb a lot of stairs. The building was designed with a ramp on a shallow enough gradient that a donkey could carry the caliph to the top. And medieval cities loved earthy, descriptive names like Donkey Gate or Fish Market or Copper Street. And you'll notice we're seeing more mules as we're getting close to the Qubbat al-Himar. I mean, joke aside, some sources suggest that this place sheltered pack animals, so water carriers or loading, unloading activity near the canals. So you see the dome of the donkey well here. It looks like a high pavilion with a dome built with a spiring ramp, and it was likely used as a lookout. Medieval historians like Al-Khatib al-Baghdadi or Yaqut al-Hamawi mention it as a well-known riverside landmark. It was built as part of the Taj Palace that was started by Caliph al-Mu'tadid and finished by his son and successor al-Muqtafi. Now, remember that Baghdad was huge and you don't move food, water, paper, bricks, or firewood with horses alone. Mules and donkeys were the engines of the city. Chroniclers mention them constantly, actually, because they were everywhere. They could be used anywhere from luxury items, transport, to large agricultural projects. So in a nutshell, mules and donkeys were held in high esteem during the Abbasid era. These are animals with a humble nature and very resilient. I have to say, they appear in many tales and stories. There is a popular story about a muleteer named Ali who traveled around Baghdad with a stubborn old mule. And one night, as they crossed a narrow path by the canal, Ali tried to push the mule forward, but it refused to move. So he got annoyed and he stepped ahead on his own, and the ground immediately gave way beneath his feet. The mule had basically sensed the danger. So the story ends with Ali thanking the animal, realizing that patience and humility, even from a mule, could save a life. And that's probably why a landmark ends up called the Dome of the Ass. Now, lightning can strike twice. Like the Palace of the Green Dome, the Dome of the Ass was one of the major Baghdad buildings destroyed prior to the Mongol sacking. It was struck by lightning in 1154, leading to a fire that mostly destroyed it. And then it was leveled in 1178. Basim, his name, it means the cheerful one, the smiling one. I love that. What a wonderful sight of Baghdad, a city that stood at the heart of the world. When Caliph al-Mansur had Baghdad built, he called it Medinat as-Salam, the city of peace. It would become the city of knowledge and world trade. And in this 360-degree view, we see the whole city of Baghdad, the surrounding desert, the palm groves to the south. You wouldn't see mountains in real life, they're 300 kilometers away, but Ubisoft decided to move them closer for the game. But overall, the cityscape is great. You know, historians like myself have a hard time recreating maps of Abbasid Baghdad because we have almost no archaeology. So we create maps using what we have, literary sources for the most part. So given the challenges, the Mirage historians did a really good job bringing the city back to life. And despite a few inaccuracies overall, it's a very credible reconstruction of a remarkable city. Thanks for joining me as I looked at Assassin's Creed's Mirage recreation of Baghdad during the Abbasid Caliphate. You can go deeper into the history that inspires the Assassin's Creed games by watching videos with historical experts on the Echoes of History channel.